I'm going to tell you a story about a conversation I was had with some folks about a year or so ago, and I want to see if you can relate to this. So they had spent their whole previous year working really, really hard. They'd been at work, they hadn't had a lot of holidays, they had paid all their staff, they'd paid all their suppliers, they kept current with the IRD, they'd done a whole lot of stuff, they'd been really, really busy, and they lost about 400K. Not a good place to be. And if you're watching this, you may or may not be able to relate to that. But for them, they're a small to medium business. Turnover was about that $5 million mark. And they've been in business for probably 5 or 6 years, had been okay prior to last year, but some certain things happened and they just lost a bucket of money. So you imagine that. You imagine you're sitting back at the end of the year, you're having a look, you're thinking about all the hard work you've gone and done, and you realise that you are 400K in the hole compared to where you were at the beginning of the year. So they came and had a chat to me and we tried to work out what had gone wrong, but more importantly, what could we do to fix it, because they couldn't afford to have another year like that, that's for sure. So we took things back to basics. And I think for a lot of people, when we think about our business and when we think about strategy and direction and all the important things we need to do, sometimes we just really overcomplicate and overthink things. So for these folks, we went right back to basics. And my first question is always, what's it all about? What is it we're trying to achieve? What does winning actually look like for us? If we sat down in 5 years' time, had a coffee, had a beer, whatever it might be, what do they want? What's the outcome that they're looking for? So that's the first piece, because if you're not clear on that, then it's very hard to understand whether you're on track or not. The next thing was around the market. Whereabouts in the market did they want to play? Who were their customers? What segments of the markets were they in? Because when we came to build their customer avatar, you need to be very, very clear on that. And then we had the conversation about, so why do people want to come and do business with you? What makes you better than someone else? Why would they come to you as opposed to your competitors? So it's trying to understand that USP, unique selling point, red ocean, blue ocean, whatever strategy or words that you might use, but what is it that you can do differently that people want to come and do business with you? And then it's thinking around all those management support systems, the key activities we need to put in place, and the risks. So we did that broader overview, just got a feel for where they're at. And then this is where they probably fell over, because they were pretty clear on all that sort of stuff, but they fell over at the execution part. And I see this time and time again. People have really good ideas, sometimes in their heads, other times on paper. They have really good ideas, but they are just not very good at executing. There's so much white noise going on. We're so busy being busy, they just don't get the important things done. And so we looked at their business and we said, right, let's set ourselves 3 objectives for the coming year. And so that's for the March 26 year. So we're about 6 months into that journey now from 1st of April. So let's think about some key objectives that we need to set in place. Let's not overthink it. What's going to make the difference? What's going to take us from a loss of 400K to at least break even in this coming year, if not a little bit better than that? And I always think in 5 pillars or 5 tranches when I think about execution. So the first part is the whole planning part. So we just got very clear, if this is the 12-month focus, let's just break those down into smaller chunks, work out what we need to do, who's going to do it, when it's going to happen. Let's think about 90-day blocks and just take that big picture and make it something really, really manageable. The second one is around that whole sales and marketing part of the business, because you can have the best product, you can have the best service, but if you're not telling people about it, then it becomes pretty hard to sort of cut through the noise in the marketplace. So we made sure they had some good support around their marketing and around their comms. Their brand needed a bit of a refresh. They needed to tell their story in a slightly different way. So we made sure that they were doing all of that and their message to market was consistent with what they were offering, because there was a bit of a mismatch between brand, look and feel and where they wanted to be. Even simple things like, following up leads, getting back to customers, having those inquiries, having those customer conversations, doing the whole sales process. They were just very, very loose around all of that. The next part was around the operation part of the business. So the third tranche was around the operational part of the business. So this was doing their core business, and they're a trade-related business. So they had people on the ground, they had people in the office. It was trying to make sure all the pieces worked together. So making sure there was good onboarding between the owner who was out doing the selling part of the process to the team on the ground. Making sure the team on the ground knew exactly what they needed to do, that time and cost was being recorded properly, variations were being recorded. We understood when we had WIP or income in advance, what impact that would have on the business, that we weren't doing any rework. It's just a very solid back to basics approach. The next step was the finance and admin part of the business. So looking at the numbers, trying to understand what were the numbers telling us, because we knew they made a loss, but we actually had to drill into that a lot more. And it was a combination of things, probably. Their sales weren't sufficient to cover their overhead costs simply because their GP had declined. So we built a bottom-up budget. We said, righto, let's look at break even. Let's look at the expenses we think we're going to need, and we cut those right back. That's how many GP dollars we need. We knew what our GP average should be. That told us what our turnover target was, and then just slowly, bit by bit, they've got out and executed month on month. And then the fifth part, before I tell you about the result, was the people side of the business. So you can imagine if you've lost 400 odd K, you're not necessarily feeling the love to your team. And it's not the team's fault, because I always think if things aren't working well in your business, the first place we need to look is look in the mirror, and the behavior that we tolerate is the behavior that we get. So we put a real focus on trying to build the team, build some leadership within the team, both at the owner's level and with some key people in there, but just make people feel engaged, make people feel really loved. So by doing those simple things, we're coming up to the first 6 months at the end of September. Now, it'll depend on how the September period goes, but we think they'll probably make for the first 6 months a profit of about 200K. Remember, they lost 400 in the total year last year, so they're probably to the end of September, they'll probably make about 200. And the pipeline for September through to March next year, not quite sure yet, but it should be no worse than it currently is. So simply by stopping, stepping back, asking for some help, they were able to turn that business around. And I see it time and time again. I've spent 15 years working as an independent business advisor. And some businesses will have times where things just become a little bit rocky. They just sort of get out of kilter. And that's not uncommon, but it's having the courage to say, hey, what do I need to do? So if that resonates with you, if you've been in that position, or maybe you're in that position now and you'd like help, reach out, give me a call, and we can have a bit of a chat. But whatever you do, you don't want to be losing 400K one year, 400K the next year, and 400K the following year, because that's definitely a recipe for not sticking around very long. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.